efficiency. Sorry, Professor Paganelli. Yes, and we know that yes, Professor Paganelli is one of the most famous historians of economic thought, and she explores the links between the Scottish Enlightenment and the results from behavioral economics and institutional economics. So I have the pleasure of giving the floor to Professor Paganelli. You have about 30 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the accommodation of my time with the time difference that you have. So thanks again for the invitations. It's really great. I would like to talk today about the morality of political economy. So I will focus mostly on Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. And I would like to bring to light some aspects of the Wealth of Nations that I think may be relevant to today. And I also think that occasionally they're not as highlighted as they should be. And this is a great occasion to do it because it's also the 300th birthday of Adam Smith. So this makes me particularly happy to be able to participate at this event. And the reason, the approach that I'm taking is to suggest to read the Wealth of Nations in the same way as Smith interpreted it, at least in his own word. In his correspondence, is telling us that the Wealth of Nations for him was the very violent attack that I made upon the whole commercial system of Great Britain. And he's saying that in the context of the correspondence, that when his friend David Hume died, before his friend David Hume died, he offered to finish his autobiography so that he would be able to describe how Hume passed. And he did it, and he described the Hume passing as a very peaceful passing. And that caused a lot of trouble to Smith, because he was not supposed to say that somebody who did not believe in God, was considered an infidel, would be able to die peacefully. But it's like he received more criticism, more abuses in the word Smith uses, for that description of the death of David Hume than with this violent attack that he made upon the whole commercial system of Britain. And so I would like to explore what it means that Smith considered this, at the Wealth of Nations, a violent attack against the commercial system of Britain, and in a sense why he didn't receive as many criticism as he was expecting to receive. And I think that part of the reasons why the Wealth of Nations was considered an attack against mercantilism, the commercial system of Britain, is what Smith then calls also mercantile system, or we call mercantilism, is because I don't think that he presents a trade-off between justice and efficiency. And I would like to suggest that in the Wealth of Nations for Smith, what is just is what is efficient, and what is unjust is inefficient. And so the standard trade-off that we think in economics, at least, between efficiency and justice, is just absent in Smith. And I think that it's just like a is not the way to approach the problem. Instead, what is just is what happens to be efficient as well. And so his main concern is not necessarily efficiency, but is justice, which happens to be efficient as well. And the reason why I'm saying this is because if the wealth of nations is indeed a violent attack against mercantilism, then we can understand in what sense mercantilism is an unjust set of policies that also happen to be inefficient. And the reason why I would suggest this is because mercantilists, in Smith's account at least, are special interest groups that are able to capture the state power and are able to achieve policies that are actually violent so that they can benefit themselves at the expense of everybody else. And when I say that the policies are violent is because Smith tells us that the merchants and manufacturers that are able to combine in special interest groups use the blood and treasure of their fellow citizens to enrich themselves. And when I say the blood, when Smith says blood and treasure, he really means it. So he's really saying that the mercantilists are basically using blood money to enrich themselves. And they're able to do it under the false pretense that they are enriching the country, when in reality they are impoverishing the country. Now, how is it possible to make the claim, which in today's language would be that what Smith is describing is state capture by special interest groups? This is a public choice approach, a public choice reading. Smith didn't have the formal apparatus for it, but the logic that he presents is exactly the same as we would expect to have from a public choice scholar today. And I'm saying this because today we understand lobbying as achieving concentrated benefits through dispersed costs, meaning that you have special interest groups that are small and concentrated. They're able to capture the state to benefit themselves at the expense of others, but the others will face a very small cost for each individual action. And therefore, they're not going to be motivated enough to form another interest group to counteract them. And also, it's going to be difficult for the people who are facing these costs to capitalize in the same way as special interest groups can do, because they are dispersed. That's exactly how Smith describes the power of merchants and manufacturers. He claims that merchants and manufacturers are concentrated in cities. There are few of them, first of all, and they all live clustered together in urban environment. The majority of the population, on the other hand, in Smith's time, lived in the countryside, and so they're dispersed. So it's much more difficult for farmers to actually get together to form a cartel. It's very easy, on the other hand, for merchants and manufacturers to do it because of the proximity in which they live and operate. Smith starts with this assumption or with this observation and then tells us there is a problem with the special interest groups that merchants and manufacturers have, because their interest is actually going in the opposite direction than the interest of society. And that's always the case. The reason why Smith says this is because merchants and manufacturers have basically two main interests. One is to expand their market, and that is actually a good thing, because for consumers as well, an expanded market is a better thing, because we are able to get more things. But the problem is that they not only want to enlarge the market, they want to increase prices and decrease competition, because that's how we increase prices. So they want a larger market with less competition in it so that they can increase their own prices. And that goes against the interest of society, because the majority of the population, being consumers, prefer instead to have a lower prices. If this was the only problem, in a sense, wouldn't be a major problem. Because it may be in my interest to increase prices and to decrease competition, but if I don't have any power to actually achieve it, it just sits as unfulfilled desire in a sense. The problem that Smith sees is that the merchants and manufacturers are actually willing and able to convince the legislator and the population that what is good for them is good for society. They are able to convince the society that their own interest is exactly the same as the interest of society. They are able to say, I am rich, and therefore I know how to make the country rich as well. And that, Smith says, is a lie, because nobody understands with clarity how to make a country rich. You can know how to make yourself rich, but not how to make a country rich. And so people tend to, legislators and the common people tend to look up at rich merchants and manufacturers because the majority of the population is ignorant about commerce. It's not what they do. In addition, Smith tells us, this comes from the theory moral sentiments, but works in is explained in theory moral sentiments, but is used in the Wealth of Nations. We tend to admire the rich simply because they're rich. And so we have this sort of blind admiration and blind trust that whatever a rich person tells us is going to be right simply because they're rich. And we just like to be in their presence. We like to be liked by them. And so we do what they tell us to do. That is a very dangerous thing, because if indeed the rhetoric that the rich are using, the rich merchants and manufacturers are using, is a rhetoric that claims that their interest is the same as the interest of society, while in reality it's not, then you're going to run into problems. And the problem becomes extremely dangerous because with this sophistry, they are able to affect the legislation. They are able to capture the state, the power of the state, and use that power in their own favor. So Smith tells us that the special interest groups, these big merchants and manufacturers, conspire against the public. This is his word, Smith's word, that they conspire against the public. They're able to obtain monopoly with force and intimidating the legislator as well. So the interest groups are so powerful that put so much pressure on the legislator to intimidate it if the legislator doesn't do what they want them to do. And what they want them to do is obtain monopoly power. The consequence is, in Smith's account, the creation of the British Empire. So for Smith, the entire British Empire is a product of special interest groups, is a product of state capture that allows monopolies to gain a lot of resources in terms of monetary and in terms of power. So the entire British Empire for Smith is a creation of special interest groups. Why is this a problem? And I'm going to cite directly from Smith. Because to hurt in any degree the interest of any other order of citizens for no other purpose but to promote that of some other is evidently contrary to justice and equality of treatment which the sovereign owes to all his subjects. So Smith is explicitly telling us that state capture is a major problem because it is causing injustice. Because it's benefiting some at the expense of others goes contrary to justice. Why is injustice inefficient, and why is that a problem? As I mentioned, Smith believes that the monopolies that special interest group achieved are achieved through blood money. And he really means blood money, because the higher prices are achieved through, are paid in a sense with human lives. And they're paid with human lives both literally, in the sense that there are wars that are fought with blood and treasure to defend those monopolies, or to establish the monopolies and then defend them. And Smith is willing to say that all the wars that Britain fought in the last couple of 100 years are caused by special interest groups, are meant to defend the monopoly powers that some special interest group have achieved. And lobbying allows the special interest group to change the idea of what should be natural, that commerce creates a bond of friendship, into thinking that commerce creates enemies. And so our trading partners are no longer our partners, but they become our enemy that we have to fight against. If this was not enough, Smith tells us that monopolies are creating death also because they are destroying crops as well as people in order to maintain high prices. He gives the example of Bengal. Bengal in Smith's time is a very fertile land, and Smith claims that is so fertile that it could sustain a very large population. But Bengal has been under the protection of the East Indian Company. And what happens there is, Smith tells us that hundreds of thousands of people die of starvation in a year, despite the fertility of the land. And the reason is because the East Indian Company doesn't need to have that many people, and so it just starved them off. If you think how Smith describes the East Indian Company in the Wealth of Nations, and you compare certain things with what he says in the Theory of Moral Sentiments, you get a sense of the devastating criticism that Smith actually makes. In Wealth of Nations, Smith says that the East Indian Company officials, when they grab as much as they can, and when they leave the country, they leave a destruction behind that is as bad as a major earthquake. And they just walk away without turning back. In the Theory of Moral Sentiments, he also describes an earthquake. He says that if we are told that the entire population of China, which is as far away as it can in Smith's time, is going to be destroyed by an earthquake the next day, and we were asked to save the population of China from this destruction by giving up our little finger, he says there is not a villain on earth that would not give up their little finger to save the entire population of China. And yet, in the Wealth of Nations, it tells us the officials of the East Indian Company are creating that earthquake and leaving the entire population of Bengal to be destroyed. That's a major moral accusation that Smith is making to the East Indian Company and its monopoly. Furthermore, the high prices that monopolies are causing are prices that are hurting the poor. The poor being poor are the people that are most affected by higher prices. And the problem with the poor is that they are the most vulnerable people in society. He tells us that in the Highlands of Scotland, which is a very poor part of the country at the time, a woman would give birth to 20 children just to see 2 of them survive. And that's because of the poverty. it tells us that there are parts of China where the poverty is so severe that parents are drowning their children like puppies because they can't afford to sustain them. Or that there are civilizations in which the poverty is so severe that people think that they're forced to abandon their children, their elderly, and the people who are affected by lingering diseases to be devoured by wild beasts. Because again, you don't have enough to survive. So whenever you have artificially high prices, you're forcing people to sacrifice the life of the most vulnerable people in society. And for Smith, that is a very deep injustice. So when there is state capture, you're going to experience a slow economic growth. You're retarding growth. And retarding growth implies you're prolonging poverty. But poverty is a source of death. And so whenever you're slowing growth, you're increasing the number of deaths unjustly. So when Smith tells us that the merchants and manufacturers that capture state power are using the blood and the treasure of the fellow citizens, is telling us the state capture is increasing the number of people who are dying that shouldn't be dying. So for Smith, I think that understanding the nature and causes of wealth allows us to live and to live well, allows more people to live and more people to live well. And this is why there is this strong condemnation of trade restrictions that come from, and these are Smith's words, the mean rapacity of merchants and manufacturers. Those are, yes, inefficient, but they're also unjust. And so with this reading, I'm suggesting that we can understand the condemnation that Smith offers of the mercantile system in a public choice key as a condemnation against state capture and cronyism. Does he offer a solution? Sort of. He's telling us, and I'm going to quote, the proposal of any new law or regulation of commerce which come from this order of people who live by profit, which are the merchants and manufacturers, are always to be listened to with great precaution, and ought never to be adopted until after having been long and carefully examined, not only with most scrupulous, but with the most suspicious attention. It comes from an order of men whose interest is never exactly the same with that of the public, who have generally an interest to deceive and even to oppress the public, and who accordingly have upon many occasions both deceived and oppressed it. So Smith is telling us be very, 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 very careful before actually approving any laws or regulations that come from special interest groups. So I think that one of the messages that we can derive from the Wealth of Nations is that it is impossible to have a society that grows wealthy without being just as well. So the wealth and justice are two things that move in the same direction and they grow hand in hand. So the only way for a nation to grow wealthy is if this growth is accompanied by justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Professor Paganelli, thank you for a wonderful talk. I have probably one simple question and one clarification. The question is the following. What is the value of Adam Smith for ordinary people, for modern ordinary people, not for university professors who always want to stand on the shoulders of the giants? Yes, and not the question, but clarification. Do I understand correctly that The Wealth of Nation could be viewed as a book about, I would say, system of just, and could this system be also an efficient system? Yes, thank you.
Let me start with the clarification. And yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. That one way to understand the wealth of nations is that Smith's main concern is understanding what is a just system. And the just system is also an efficient system. Which is another way of saying that systems that are unjust are going to create inefficiencies in society. So yes, that's exactly the message that I'm trying to put across with this work. What is the
value?
The value
Yes,
of
Adam Smith,
Smith
for ordinary people, yes,
yeah.
not for us.
yeah. I think that Smith can teach all of us, regardless of who we are, in a sense, few lessons. First is that in this particular context, to be aware of where laws come from and not to be fooled by rhetorics that are meant to benefit only some groups as opposed to others. And so look, in a sense, today I guess we would say look for the money, where the money comes from, like follow the money. And so to analyze, look at who benefits from certain policies. And so be a little bit more skeptical about people who are telling you that they know what is good for you, and they know what is good for the country. So that I think is one of the main messages that I think that may be of value for ordinary people. Another value I think is to again goes back to the idea of not everything that is efficient has to be unjust. And so in a sense, good policies are good policies in the sense that they actually work, and they work for society as well. And I can give you an example that I didn't mention explicitly, is just implied in this. But one lesson that I think is important for most people is understanding. Or maybe not most people, but at least for people who are in the position to give salaries to others, that if you fairly compensate people, you will have a more productive labor force, as opposed to if you try to lower wages so that the fruit of the labor, as Nick calls it, of the worker, doesn't go to the worker, you're going to have a less productive labor force. So it seems like a just policy to compensate workers fairly, but that also is something that works in your favor if you are a business person, because you will have a more productive labor force. And Smith tells us that the least productive workers, the most expensive worker that you can have, are enslaved labor. Right? Because they have no incentive to work. They do the minimum necessary to survive. So if you really want to have very, very, very expensive labor force in the sense that they are least productive, don't pay them. And instead, if a worker is able to keep most of their compensation, most of the fruits of their labor as their own compensation, they will have all the incentives to actually produce more and be more productive. So those are some of the lessons that I think that are linked to this particular topic that can be of value for ordinary people. The last one I would say that we shouldn't be afraid of foreigners. So that's part of Smith's point in complaining against the merchants and manufacturers. They're transforming our trading partners into enemies because of, and this is maybe something that an ordinary person wouldn't use in their own language, but because merchants and manufacturers that have this monopolizing spirit want to present trade as a zero-sum game. And so what I gain is what you lose. And therefore, if you gain, I'm going to lose. And you, as a foreign country, you, France, for example, in Smith's situation, are going to become my enemy. And instead, Smith says, no, that's just nonsense. Like, trade is a mutually beneficial interaction. And you want your trading partners to be wealthy, because you can't, if they're not wealthy, they can't buy much from you. Okay? So you should be happy that your trading partners are wealthy, and you shouldn't envy their wealth and try to get them to be poorer than you, because then you're going to be worse off too. So I think that the understanding that trade is a mutually beneficial activity that our trading partners, in particular our foreign trading partners in Smith's context, are not our enemies but our benefactors in many ways, is a very valuable message that ordinary people could learn from Smith.
Thank you, Professor Paganelli. Yes, one more question. Yes, we have one more question. Probably,
Yeah.
you.
Sure.
Please come closer.
Oh, okay.
It's more convenient.
Следующий к теме, чтобы могла видеть или как?
Да.
А.
Don't be shy.
Hello.
Hello. So may I also ask you a question, please? So we all know that we cannot argue that the Wealth of Nations, well, this book, well, by Adam Smith, was like a diamond of the economic science, well, in his time and also in our times. But I can also say, what if I say what if I tell you that one factor that has always been present, so both in his time, both in our time, and both between this time. So that was human behavior. So was the behavior and the understanding that we are a human being, and therefore justice is always efficient and injustice is always inefficient is not true. So you remember that in 1993, well, Robert Vogel got a Nobel Prize, in economics, in economic science actually, for proving that slavery was 30%, at least 30% more efficient than the normal type of economics. So we can say, and moreover, before that time, so everybody was taught at school that slavery was not so efficient, and therefore, so people gave it up. No, he proved the vice versa. But why did people come to this? Well, why did they give up? Well, because the behavioral part. So because the morality. So people understood that, in 1820s, it was quite normal. So everybody said, this is the type of economics that we should not change. Well, that is how people thought. So not economic, scientists actually. Well, not like the economists. And already in the 40s, people thought that the slavery was the worst thing in economics that they could have, and it also led to the war between the North and the South, in the United States. So that was 15 years later. So after the time, and I've also seen some pictures. It's not like caricatures, but some kind of pictures like well, well, yeah, that slaves were sold. Well, and also some kind of a note that well, here you can see a black family. Well, this sold well to different people, and they might not be well, might not see each other any more time again. So so what do you think about it? So now, can you now say that justice is always sufficient and injustice is always inefficient? So
Right.
thank you.
Um,
In our
that's
time.
yeah. So I'm thinking of what incentives does a slave to work? What incentives does a slave have to be productive? And I'm thinking of two major figures of today's world. Thinking of Elon Musk or Steve Jobs. Would they have achieved as slaves the same achievements that they achieved as free laborers?
It's controversial.
I'm just asking, like, it may be controversial, or maybe it's just like, would Elon Musk have done the same thing that he has done today had he been a slave? What incentive would he have had? Would Steve Jobs or Bill Gates have achieved the kind of innovations and the kind of amount of work that they have done had they been slaves? I mean, Elon Musk slept under his desk for years just so he could be in the office, right? Would the slave have done it?
I think that sorry about it. I think that well, if we're talking about a leader like Elon Musk or like Bill Gates and so on, so of course if he were a slave, so of course we wouldn't have such a productive well type of companies, yeah. So like they have and like they created well from nothing. But if we're talking about the workers, so I mean that. Well, of course, I'm against slavery. Well, everybody is against slavery. But I think that, well, I assume that if we're talking about, well, the time before 1993, so when it was proven, then, well, at that time, it might have been more effective. More effective, though not moral at all. So. And therefore, I say that morality is even a more important factor. So the human behavior, so that we understand that we are human beings, and not just so that this is not just the economic machine. So what is the economic machine? This is it consists of us, of people, and what we think. So what we think it to be. So it will be the machine that works under our opinions.
Right. So again, I think that you can present the problem in two different ways. You could make a claim that the starting point in Smith is actually a moral ground. And so he makes certain assumptions on a moral ground, and from those assumptions, he builds his system. On the other hand, you can also just look at human nature and look at incentives that we have. And I'm not sure that there is that much difference between you and Elon Musk, or between myself and Elon Musk, or between myself and you. Right? I mean, if we are all human beings and we all respond to incentives.
True.
So if you were not paid, or if you were forced to do certain kind of things, most likely you would do less than what you're doing right now. If your salary is completely disconnected from your productivity, you are going most likely to be less productive than if your salary is linked to your productivity. Because if you produce more, you can gain more. If you produce less, you gain less. So I don't think that there is that much difference between Musk and yourself, for that matter. We all respond to incentives. again, maybe a little bit more or a little bit less, but we all move in the same directions. So if you're paid for something, and if we care about receiving wealth, then we are motivated to do more than if we are not paid at all.
That's true. I wouldn't argue that is actually true. So, thank you for this kind of discussion. So thank you for a lecture, and so was very glad to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. But again, if I may, I think for Smith in particular, I think that his starting point is a moral assumption.
Yes.
So he is making the assumption that we are all morally equal, and therefore slavery is something to abhor on a moral ground. And also, look, it doesn't work. It is also inefficient. But I think that the starting point is indeed a moral position.
Thank you, Professor Paganelli. It was a really great honor for us. Thank you for this wonderful discussion, interesting lecture. Yes, it was really great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure. Good luck with the rest of the seminars.